Hi, I'm Roger Sadowsky, and I wanted to take this opportunity to demonstrate how to install the Sadowsky onboard preamp assembly. Now, there are going to be different applications for using this. This is how it looks coming out of the box. And this can be used either to upgrade the electronics on a MetroExpress or to install in a base that's not a Sadowsky base. So let's try it and give you an idea of what we're going to be doing here. Now, a lot of people are going to be installing this in a J-style, a jazz-style base. So we make it pre-mounted on the control plate. But if you're installing it in any other instrument, all you have to do is remove the plate from this assembly. So to remove the knobs, you're going to need a 1.5 millimeter hex key. So we're going to just show you quickly how you would do that. There are 2 set screws for each knob, and you're going to remove the knob from the pots. And you're going to do that on all 4 pots. This one has 2 separate knobs here, one on the top and one on the bottom. So you're going to remove all the knobs from the control plate. And then you're also going to remove all the knobs on the instrument, like so. And you always want to be careful not to scratch anything. Okay, so you're going to remove all 4 knobs on the instrument, and you're going to remove all the knobs on the outboard preamp assembly. So after you remove the knobs from the base and from the control cavity, the next step is to drop all of the pots off the control plate like so, and then you have the complete harness. And now we're going to remove everything from the instrument. Now on the instrument, the nut driver for the pots is 10 millimeter. On the onboard preamp assembly, the pots are 13 millimeter. And this demonstration will also give you a sense of whether you feel you would be comfortable doing this yourself or whether you feel you should bring it to a professional guitar tech for the installation. Now we'll be opening up the back plate. And you also want a cup where you can put all your screws so you don't lose them. And if you have trouble getting the back plate out, it popped out. And this is what it looks like inside the base. So now, in the same way we remove the plate from the new preamp, we're going to remove the assembly here. So the first thing we need to do is disconnect the pickup wires. You can see here, these are the wires for the neck pickup, and these are the wires from the bridge pickup. So let's follow where they lead to. Now this is a clip that holds all the wires together, and you should gently take a wire cutter and just snip that off. And now you see how much more length you have, okay? And the same with the bridge pickup wires, they're already free. And if you have a soldering iron, you can, of course, use a soldering iron to remove the connections, which would look like this. You just gently want to heat up the place where the wire connects and remove it. Or if you're confident you're not going to need to, then you can just literally take your wire clipper and just cut the wire at the point where it connected. So we've disconnected the neck pickup. Now I'm going to disconnect the bridge pickup. So white wires are always the hot wire, and black wires are always ground or earth. And you can see these three wires, or these two yellows and this black, are all connected to the ground point or the earth point. So we're going to want to keep these together so we don't confuse them with any others. And I'm going to do that by twisting them together so that I know these are all the ground wires. Okay, so we have the two pickup pots, we have the two pickup grounds, and then we have the two additional ground wires. Just so you know, ground is ground. Any common ground point is ground. There's no one specific place where it has to be attached. The circuit board is attached just with some double stick tape. You can remove the connectors, and then just using your fingers, you should be able to pull this up and remove it like so. Okay? So we can set this aside. And the only thing left to remove now is the output jack. And there's no nut on the outside. It's in this recessed cup. So what we have to do is remove the entire cup. There are just two screws, one on each side. We're going to remove that. And then once the cup is removed, we can unscrew the jack from the cup. And then we can feed this through the hole, and then we remove the entire assembly. Okay? You can remove the battery at this point, set it aside, but we're not going to use this anymore, so that we can set this aside. So at this point, I suggest you gather up all the parts from the old pickup assembly, all the nuts. You can see the difference in the lock washer size between the new pots and the old pots. So get all these smaller parts rounded up so you don't get confused when you go to put everything back together again, and you can set them aside. All right, so now the main thing that has to be done is the upgraded electronic assembly has a larger size here than the original pots. So we're going to have to open up these holes a bit. And it's not difficult to do. You can get a reamer like this in any hardware store, and they're quite easy to use. And I'm going to demonstrate now how you do that. If you do it from the front end, you just stick it in the hole and gently start turning like so. And then what you want to do is just take one of the pots and keep working it until the hole is big enough for the pot shaft to fit into the hole. And in many ways, you might find it easier to work from the back and do it in this manner. So you just keep turning the reamer, and then you test to see if you've opened it enough for the pot to fit. So let's keep going until we get one done. Okay, and that's perfect. It can be a little bit larger, that's not a problem, but you want to get it as close to the size of the pot as possible. Okay, so now we can begin to install the new pots as we've opened up the holes so that they'll all fit. Now this was originally mounted on the control plate, and that's why it has this nut here at the bottom. This will not go poke through all the way, so we need to remove all these additional nuts from the pots. This one's a little tight, so I just need to use the 13mm wrench to loosen it up. Okay, so now we're ready to install the assembly. So just so you can keep track of the pots, the smallest one here is the first one, it's the volume. Then this double pot is the blend pot. The third pot is the push-pull VTC pot. The push-pull part is the bypass switch for the preamp. And then we have the stack pot with bass on the bottom and treble on top. So now we want to install the pots. We'll start off with the small one, which is the volume. You want to stick it in the first position here. And you want to push it up to the top as far as you can. Put on one of these thin washers and then get the nut on, like so. And I'm just going to tighten it a little bit until they're all in. Now I take the blend pot and that goes into the second spot here. Push it up all the way. Small washer and the nut. Then comes the VTC control, which is this one, the one that pulls up and down. Then washer and the nut. And then finally the stack pot, which is the preamp, the treble, and the bass. And that goes in this fourth position here. Again, push it all the way up. Get the nut on. There we go. And we can snug it up. Now we want to turn it over again. And we can arrange the pots a little better now. So for example here, I have less tension on the wires if the pot faces the other direction. So I'm going to just loosen this one and rearrange it this way so the wires are facing this way. And then now we'll have another look, and if everything looks like they're arranged well, then we can move on to the next step. And I'm pleased with how everything looks. So now I'm going to tighten up the pots all the way. And you just need to turn them till they're snug. It's hard to over tighten them, but you want to be careful you don't tighten too much, because then you can be crushing the wood of the body. And you notice I'm holding the pot from the back so that they don't move while I'm tightening the nut from the other side. Okay, so these are all in place. And now we're going to go on to the next step. The next step is to put the circuit board for the preamp in the original spot where the old one was, which was right here. And it's easier to attach these connectors first before you put it in. You can see here that there are letters: Y for yellow, W for white, B for black, R for red. So this guides you in which direction to attach the connector. So this says yellow here, which means this connector has to be with the yellow matching up. And then on this connector, we've got red, green, blue, and black. So there are going to be two B's. So the easiest thing is to look for the red wire, and the red one is the one in the middle. And so we install it this way. And this is all connected now. And then just test where it's going to go. Make sure that nothing's in the way. Now, what I'm seeing right now is I'm going over these wires. I think I would like to go underneath like this. So now I can put it like so, and we can take this piece of paper off and then stick it down in that spot and push it down firmly. You don't want to damage the components, but you can firmly press it down so it's not going to move and stay in place. Now, the remaining jobs are to connect these wires where they used to go and the output jack. Okay, now we're going to install the output jack. So we're going to feed this through the hole here. And then, to prevent the connections from the jack possibly touching the shielding pane, we want to put a little piece of heat shrink over the wires and the terminals like so. And so we have it like this. Then we put the lock washer on here, and we put the socket jack on here, and we tighten it finger tight as we can. And then we feed everything back through. And then we can line up the holes where they originally were, which was this way. And then we can take the original screws and screw that cup back in like so. I always surround the tip of the screwdriver with my fingers to prevent myself from slipping and accidentally scratching the finish of the instrument. Okay. We can add the second screw later. Now we have our battery wire terminal, which we want to move over to this section so it's in the right place, like this. And now we can look to do our original connections. So now we need to get our remaining wires together for being reattached and resoldered. So the thing to do is start with your wire clipper and cut a clean end on all of your wires like so. And then the next step is we have to expose the wire that's being protected by this rubber on the outside, this plastic. So you need a tool called a wire stripper. And again, this is a tool that you could probably buy at pretty much any good hardware store. And you feed the wire through like so. And then you squeeze, and it pushes the insulation off the wire. And then you take the remaining wire that's there and you twist it. And you'll do that to all the remaining wires here. I'll do one more to show you. I want to be about like so. And then you just squeeze and twist the wire. So now I've stripped all the ends of the wires. And when you solder, you want to do a process called pre-tinning, which is we want to get some solder on the wire end before we solder it to its connection, and it makes soldering so much easier. So what we need to do is we need to get a length of solder. And then we want to protect the guitar so we don't splash any solder on it. And we take our soldering iron and we just hold it under the wire and get it hot enough to flow out a little solder right onto the end of the wire like so. And now we can do this one. We can do this one. And again, this step is called pre-tinning. So these are done. It takes a little experience to do this. And again, this will give you an idea whether you feel you're comfortable doing this at home or whether you want to bring it to a shop and have a guitar tech do the installation for you. So now we're going to connect the wires to their proper locations. There's a wiring diagram here with the onboard preamp kit, but there's a much larger PDF available online on the website, which I recommend you print out, and it'll be much easier for you to read. These are the two connection points for the pickups. You can see here that there's a little silver, which is what's enabling the solder to stick to it. And I recommend that you get some solder on these two spots in advance, like so. And that'll make attaching the wire much easier. So we have some solder there, and we have some solder there. Can you see that? And now we can take our hot wire from the neck pickup, which is the white wire, and just put it in that little groove and then heat it up. You want to be very careful not to jiggle the wire before the solder hardens all the way, or you'll have a bad solder connection. And if that happens, you just need some more solder and just reheat it and do it another time. And now we're going to take the white wire from the bridge pickup and do the same thing. We're going to stick it in that little groove and heat up the solder we applied on the other side. Hold it steady, like so. So now we have our hot wires connected. So all these other wires remaining are ground wires, and they can all go to one spot. And where would the best spot be here? It is right here on the back of the blend pot. We have a nice surface of metal, and anything connected to this is connected to ground. So I'm going to start by creating a spot of solder like this, so I have room to connect all my wires. And then, as we showed before, it's probably easier to twist some of these wires together so we can attach them all at one time rather than have to do each one by themselves. Because if you do one at a time, the solder's going to melt and one of the wires you've already attached is going to come off. So this is the best way to do it. Get at least several of them together, like so. You can always twist them together to make the bundle a little easier to work with. And then what I'm going to do, again, make sure these are twisted together. So one of the first things you can do, like we pre-tin the wires first time, is we can get a little solder on this bundle, like so. There we go, it starts to flow out. Okay, and now we can take this bundle, we can hold it against this puddle of solder I started, and we can just heat it up and push it down. You want to make sure the soldering iron isn't going to burn any other wires. Now, if you do find it a little too hot to hold, you can use a tool like this to hold everything in place and then just focus on heating up the solder again, like this, and then let go. Okay, so now we have one wire left. This is also a ground wire, and we'll solder this not to exactly the same spot because we don't want those wires to get loose. So I'm going to move it a little bit further to this side, and we're going to gently melt the solder on that end until it melts into that bubble of solder we put on originally. It takes a little more heat because the back of the metal on the back of the pot is absorbing the heat from the soldering iron. So it takes more heat to do a ground wire like this than to connect to a terminal on a pot. And I'm going to check that's firmly in place. So now just check that there are no loose wires that haven't been connected. Everything looks good. So our next step is to reconnect our battery. And you always want to be careful that you touch the right terminals. If you try to connect the battery backwards, sometimes you can damage a circuit, so we want to make sure everything goes in the right spot. Firmly click that on, put it in place. And now we can put our cover back on, our back plate, like so. And I recommend, until you get a chance to plug the instrument in, you don't put all the screws back in. You may find that you might have done something wrong and you don't have to remove all the screws again. Now, one thing I want to explain before I close this up is people have different preferences in which direction they want a blend pot to go. So my preference has always been that clockwise, like this, is the bridge pickup, and counterclockwise is the neck pickup. Some people intuitively think that's backwards, and if that's the case, all you have to do to change the direction of the blend pot is to reverse these two wires, and that will reverse the direction of the blend pot. There's no right or wrong. It's whatever you're used to. If you've had an instrument that always went in the opposite direction that we normally do, it's totally fine to wire this up in the direction you're comfortable with. So now we'll put the back plate back on. You want to make sure there are no wires interfering with the back plate fitting all the way down. And let's get one screw in here. And we'll get one screw in here. And this would also be a good time to put in the second screw for the output jack. Okay. And now the next step is to put our knobs back on. You want to turn all the pots except the blend pot all the way clockwise or to the right. And this pot has a center detent. It goes to one side, it goes to the other side, and then there's this little click right in the middle, and that's where you want to keep that one. So take your first knob, line it up. I usually like to line it up in the same direction as the pots are. And for starters, you just snug up one of the two set screws. You want to turn to make sure it's not rubbing, because if the knob's too low, it's going to rub. So that's all you do, is feel to make sure it's not rubbing. This one, again, you want to line up the line. Make sure it's seated well. Tighten one up. And then we have this knob. So, tighten it up. Then we have the bottom knob for the base knob, and this part right here goes to the bottom, like so. Okay, and before we go further, again, we want to make sure nothing is rubbing. Now this is rubbing a little bit. So what I'm going to do is loosen the knob and just pull it up a teeny bit. And then check it again, and that feels much better. And then make sure this one, same thing. Let me raise that up a little. That feels much better. Yeah, I'm going to do the same thing here. If the knob is too low, it's rubbing against that nut that attached the pot. Okay, So I'm here, and what I'm seeing now is that this is not lining up exactly where I want it. I need it to be here. So then I loosen it. You want to turn it all the way around so it stays at that 10 spot on the pot. Get it lined up. Pull it up a teeny bit. Remember, this is a push-pull pot, so you need to be able to go like this and like that. And in the down position, it shouldn't be rubbing. So now they're lined up, and now I can add the top treble pot. Make sure again that's turned all the way to the right. Line it up. If you set it too low, and I'll do it on purpose, when you turn one knob, it's going to move the other. So you need to raise the top knob just enough so that these work totally independently. You don't want the top to move when you turn the bottom, and you don't want the bottom to move when you turn the top. And now you're done. Okay, at this point, I would plug it into my amplifier, listen to it. You have the option at that point to decide if you like the direction of the pan pot, and you can reverse those two white wires if you want it to go the other way. And just to review with these new controls, compared to the original MetroExpress, you have your master volume, you have your pickup blend. This is the VTC control. VTC stands for Vintage Tone Control. It has nothing to do with the preamp. It's a passive control where 10 is your normal sound, and as you turn it towards 0, you're rolling off a lot of high end and getting a much warmer, darker tone. And then this is the preamp control. The top knob is the treble boost. The bottom knob is the bass boost. I recommend you always start with that at 0, because that is flat. So 0 is flat on the preamp, and 10 is flat on the VTC. And then you can experiment with boosting treble, boosting bass. You're pretty much never going to want to go to 10 on the preamp. It's just too much, too bright, too much bottom end. I find the most useful range is from about a quarter to 75% of the way up. And there you go. You're done. Put back the screws remaining on the back plate, clean up your guitar, and you're all finished.